Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. And today we welcome Mitchell Osmond onto the show. And I'm looking forward to diving deep with Mitchell today on some of the things he's doing to help people in the world. So just a quick introduction to Mitchell. So Mitchell is a leadership advisor, podcast host, and founder of The Dad Nation, with a background in executive leadership and a personal story of transformation. He helps high achievers bring intentional and alignment into their health, mindset, and relationships. His podcast is rated top 10% globally and reaches over 34,000 monthly listeners. And he has created the signature program, empowers individuals to thrive both at work and home. Mitchell's work is rooted in emotional fitness, purpose-driven leadership, and building a life that reflects what matters most. Welcome to the show today, Mitchell. Glad to have you on with us. First of all, be really great to hear a little bit about what is your transformational story. I mentioned it in the bio. It'd be really good to kind of hear some of the highlights of that to get to know you.
Yeah, well, hey, first of all, Johnny, thank you for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. Love the mission of your podcast, and you're doing something great. So I'm really happy. I know there's a lot of alignment here, so I'm looking forward to jumping in. And yeah, thanks for asking, man. My transformation story, I think, is a great place to start because a lot of people might look at me today and think that I have it all together or figured a bunch of things out. But at the end of the day, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've learned a lot of lessons the hard way. I've learned a lot of painful lessons, and that's actually why I launched the Dad Nation, to help men collapse that time of the time it takes to turn your life around, and so that they don't have to get to the point that I got to. So let me tell you a little bit about those points, because there were really two, I think, pivotal moments for me that really were catalytic in my transformation. The first one was a fight, and the second one was a funeral. So let's start with the fight. I want you to picture I was sitting on the couch with my wife, and at this point we were about 3 years into marriage, and it all hit the fan. We had started today. We had started fighting about money that morphed into a fight about me not being present, and so on and so forth. But like I said, at this point, we've been married for up to 3 years, and it was a tough 3 years. We fought all the time, but this fight today was different, on this day. And I knew that I didn't think that I could fix this, and this was the first time I really felt that. I knew that if something didn't change, this was all going to be over, and so to give you a little bit of context, to step back a little bit, I had recently been let go of a senior leadership position. And for me, my career was everything. Like, it was my calling, my identity. I spiraled into depression. I was 60 pounds overweight. We were over 100 grand in debt. I was medicating with drugs and alcohol every day to cope. I mean, I was getting dangerously close to divorce and losing any hope of, any
Mm.
hope of a life that I truly desired one day. I was checked out, stressed out, burned out, Johnny. I mean, it was brutal. And here was the tension. I had seen so much success professionally, right? I could lead teams, I could lead board meetings, I could grow organizations, but why was it that I couldn't figure out my life personally? I felt so powerful at work, but I felt powerless at home. Maybe your listeners have been there.
Mm.
And to back it up even more, I came from a dysfunctional upbringing, right? I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, drugs, abuse were just a part of my family growing up. And I was caught in the middle of it all. And so, Johnny, I knew where I came from and I knew what I wanted, but I could feel myself continuously getting pulled back into the trauma of my childhood, the past mistakes my father made and his father made. And when I would yell at my wife, I could hear his voice in mine. And I knew I was called to more, but I just didn't quite know how to get there. At times, it felt like I was two different people trapped in the same body. And one day I came home from work, and my wife said, "I'm sick and tired of this. You go to work and you give everyone else the buffet, and you come home and you give me the scraps, and I'm done with it." You know, it was a sobering moment for me. And then the second point was a week, literally a week later. So here I am, 7 days later. I'm still like, man, is this over? Am I going to be alone this Christmas? What's the deal here? And then I was asked to sing at the funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man. It was about 2,000 people who showed up. And I'll never forget, I was strapping on the guitar, getting ready to sing the last song of the closing song. And I heard the minister ask the congregation, are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the legacy that you left? And Johnny, as I began to try and sing the last song, I could barely choke out the lyrics because in that moment, all I could think of was is if this was my funeral, nobody would be saying he inspired me to have an amazing marriage. He inspired me to get in shape. He inspired me to be great with my finances. They probably would have said he struggled, and then it was over. You know, and that's the thing, Johnny. At funerals, people tell stories because that's all they have left, right? So that day when I left, I was determined that I would rewrite my story, not just for me, but for my wife, my children, and the generations to come. I was determined that I was going to take complete ownership as I walked out of that church. And the next day, I tried to run a 5K and I made it about 250 meters and I puked. you know? But that was the start of my journey. And I'll tell you what, you know, I realized that if I didn't do this, nobody else would, right? That my wife wasn't going to take the bottle from my hands, that my buddies weren't going to force me to get my mental health under wraps. There was never going to be a pack of cheerleaders at the gym at 5 a.m. Like applauding me for being there. You know what I mean? At
Mm.
some point I just had to do it. And so for me, that was the big thing. And so I surrounded myself with men who my ceiling was their floor. You understand what I mean? They were living where I wanted to go.
Mm.
And these men showed me what was possible for my life. And they gave me the exact steps to get there. And they were able to show me what was possible for myself because I often couldn't see it. They held me to the standard that I said I wanted for my own life. And Johnny, within a year and a half, okay, within 18 months, we paid off over 100 grand of debt,
Wow.
completely restored our marriage, lost the 60 pounds, became
Mm.
strong, lean, and confident, and was clean, sober, and focused, and clean of distractions and all that stuff. And my life was totally transformed. And then I started helping other friends in my life, just buddies of mine, who were struggling in their marriage or struggling in their finances or couldn't lose the 50 pounds or whatever. And then over time, one of my mentors challenged me. And he said, man, if you really want to have a legacy, worth living or for imitating, like we're talking about, you need to start a podcast and share your message with the world. And so I launched the Dad Nation podcast. Within 6 months, it was a globally rated top 10% podcast, and I had listeners all around the world. And then 6 months after that, I launched the coaching practice because I would get DMs of guys just being like, how did you do this? Could you coach me? Could you teach me what you did? And then, so overall, within 18 months, I don't know, it's a weird thing about 18 months with me, but within 18 months, I launched a podcast and launched a successful coaching practice. And that's what I do today, man, is I just help transform the lives of men who have seen success professionally, but are struggling a little bit personally. The home, the health, the happiness, right? Help them turn that all around because that's where your leadership truly matters, I believe, personally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for the background and been through quite a few different scenarios there to kind of get you to where you are, and now sharing with men and helping them on their journey. What I was very curious about, Mitchell, there's quite a few bits I was curious about, but there's a part where you said, obviously, you're at the funeral, then you heard those words, and you're like, wow, what like story am I leaving? What would people say about me? Because that's all they have left of someone as the stories, and wow, I really need like a different story in my life. You're in that moment, right?
Hmm.
I feel like quite a lot of people might resonate with that. They may be in life right now going, I'm not living that life that's meaningful. I want to like leave something that's got a real story behind it. For you, how did you figure out in that moment what story you wanted to leave, or was it kind of like a process?
Mm. Yeah, that's such a great question. Thank you for asking. In all honesty, for me, it was just a move of sheer desperation. because I
Mm,
knew that my wife was going to leave. I knew that I was on the verge of
mm,
losing everything. I was already depressed. I was already in debt. I was already overweight. I got way too far. And that's why I try and help people make these decisions and get clarity before they get to that point, right? But to answer your question, really what I did was I began with the end in mind, right? And so Stephen Covey in his book, The Seven Habits
mm.
of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill, one of the greatest thought leaders of our time, said, begin with the end in mind. He talked about that all the time. My funeral moment was literally me beginning with the end in mind. And I asked myself, Mitchell, what do you want to be known for at the end of the day? Because every single day is a new opportunity to write a new chapter. But the reality is we know this to be true, Johnny, that 95% of the decisions that we make are the exact same as the decisions we made yesterday, right? The subconscious mind, where we live the vast majority of our lives on autopilot. And that's why we can wake up the next day and not even know what happened, what we did the day before, because we do the same things over and over again. Now,
Mm.
if you like where you're at, keep doing what you're doing, right? But if you don't like where you're at, then we need to begin with the end in mind. We need to take control of a lot of those decisions that we're making, change the level of our thinking, and change the level of our decision making, because we also know that the decisions that we made 3 to 5 years ago have led us to where we are today. If I think about the decisions I made 3 to 5 years ago, it makes complete sense as to why I am here where I am today. Now, if I want to be somewhere different in 3 to 5 years from now, I need to change my actions today. I need to change my decisions today. And so we have to get a very clear picture of where we're going, where we want to go, and then reverse engineer that into daily, strategies and action steps to get to that place. Otherwise, we're going to wake up tomorrow and a week and a month and a year from now, and life will look the exact same thing. Mark Twain, I love this quote from Mark Twain. He says, most men die at 27. We don't bury them until they're 72. And what
Ah,
that means is we grow, we get to that young adult phase or adult phase, and we just become victims of our environment. We don't challenge anything. We just kind of die to our dreams. We die to our passions and our desires. And then all of a sudden it's life is up, and I wake up 10 years later, and I get my wife serves me divorce papers, or I realize I don't know my kids, or I just got a bad health diagnosis, or I'm 100 grand in debt. And we're like, how did this happen? Well, it happened day after day after day because I didn't begin with the end in mind, right? And so that would be the first place I would start. And I do this with my clients. I get them to write their own eulogy, Johnny. It's crazy, in from the perspective of their wife or their children. And it sounds morbid, but it's so
that's
visceral
awesome.
and it's powerful because what I do is I say, hey, if you were to die today, I want you to visualize what your wife would be saying at your funeral while she's standing over your coffin. What would she write in the eulogy? And I want you to write that out. Now, we're going to write a version 2.0. If you were every bit the man that you were called to be, and that you're fully content and 100% living up to your potential, what would she say then? Write that eulogy. Now we're going to read them, because that is where the tension lies. The man we are today, or the person we are today, and the person we know we could be if we went all in. And that gap, that's where all that tension and frustration lies. That's the stuff that keeps us awake at night, because we know we could have done more. We know we could have took that chance, but we get sabotaged by self-limiting beliefs and you name it. I'm rambling, but that's where I would start, man. Begin with the end in mind.
Getting clear and yeah, because we can be very unconscious to life, right? Just do the same things again and again, like you were touching on, and
Yeah.
yeah, just repeat the same things. Yeah.
You know what? I'll throw this in here. It's a powerful question that your listeners, if you feel this way and you feel like, man, I just feel like I'm in a current and life is just happening to me and I'm just drifting down the river and I don't really have control. I want to ask you this question. And this is how we can begin with the end in mind. Now, if I were to see, well, I'll ask you, Johnny, if I were to see you in the airport 3 years from now, I don't know where we are, maybe JFK, and I'm like, Johnny, it has been what 3 years since I was on your show. How's life been, man? And you were like, Mitch, this has been the best 3 years of my life. Let me tell you about it.
Mm,
Now the question is what would have to be true in the next 3 years for you to be able to say that with confidence, that the best 3 years have been the best 3 years of my life? Now you're going to take that picture and you're going to write it like a movie scene, and you're going to analyze the different areas of your life. What needs to be true in your marriage, in your fatherhood, in your finances, in your faith, in your career, all those different things. And then you create this beautiful, it's like the end of the movie when you're driving off into the sunset and you paint that picture. Well, here's how much money I'm making. Here's my relationship with my wife. Here's how often we go out on a date. Here's what my relationship with my kids look like. Here's where they go to school. Here's what I do with my free time. Here is, you name it. And then we get this beautiful picture and we say, okay, what do we need to do today to be at that point to be living that life in 3 years from now? And the reason why we say three is because 10, way too far out. Even 5 years, it's hard to wrap your head around it. But 3 years, you can almost taste that. It's close enough that it's still real. And so that's a great practical exercise to start with.
I like that, but also what you brought back to living today, right? Because that feels like so much more present. I'm in control. This is what I can do today. Bringing
Mm-hmm.
that element to it as well.
Yeah, well, it's externalizing, right? Like that's the psychological term to explain you're taking yourself out of the present moment and you're thinking about the future self. Or you could also say, if 3 years from now, Mitch, we're able to reach back into time and talk to me today, would he tell me to go to the gym? Or would he tell me to stay home and crush a Big Mac? Would he tell me to scroll on my phone? Or would he tell me to sit down on the floor with my kids and play with them? Would he tell me to ignore my wife? Or would he tell me to plan a date to go out with her? And when you externalize and speak to your future self or allow him to speak to you, it becomes real clear what you need to be doing in the present moment.
And how often do you visit that vision? Because I know sometimes you can write out your dream life and you can forget about it. For you, what's kind of felt good when you've worked with guys?
Yeah. So really what we do is that is the process that we go through. We begin, way down the road, and then we chunk it down, we break it up, and then we write out what we will call success statements, right? So it's something called the prime success filter, which we could get into if you want. But essentially it's a system that we use to define what success looks like for us. Because the problem is, Johnny, is we get so overwhelmed and distracted and anxious because we're constantly comparing ourselves to the success of everyone else around us, the success of our brother-in-law, the success of our neighbor, the success of our boss, you name it. And so what we do then is we say, okay, we're no longer going to measure ourselves by the success of others, like what we see on Instagram. What does it mean for me to be successful today and tomorrow and next month? Because that looks different for everybody. And so I have a filter that you kind of run through, and then you essentially write 5 to 10 success statements. And you were to say, I'll know I'm being successful when dot dot dot, and you'd fill it out. Okay. So for example, if it were me, um, I might say, because I'm really passionate about being a great dad, about being mentally present, about being a good father or a good husband. I might say things like, I'll know I'm being successful when I can turn off my phone, at 7 p.m. and spend quality time with my wife. I'll know I'm being successful when I can train 3 times a week. I'll know I'm being successful when I can go 7 days without snapping at my kids, you know? And that's just like the relational stuff, but you could talk about finances. You could talk about career. I'll know I'm being successful when I hit 7 figures in my business. I'll know. And then essentially you define it for yourself. And honestly, print it out. I don't care. Write it in your journal, put it on your desktop, and you just basically review it once a month. I use Friday mornings for reflection. I'm like, okay, according to my standard of success, the man that I am becoming, because again, I know who I want to become, according to my statements of success, yes, 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 yes. Okay, I am meeting my definition of success. I have no other need to look elsewhere because I was the one who made the rules. Does that make sense? And then you stop looking outside. You stop comparing yourself to everybody else because that's the ultimate robber of joy. The moment you look outside your own home, at the boat across the yard, or the cottage on the lake, or whoever, what they have and what their business or their marriage, or you start, it just robs you of joy almost instantly.
What I'm hearing a lot of this work is there's a lot of more becoming like conscious of your own choices, your own decisions, and direction in your life, rather than the kind of just getting caught up in the autopilot, which sounds very empowering for the individual.
Well, yeah, because no one else is going to do it,
It
right?
sounds obvious, but we can get so snapped up, right?
100%. And this is the problem, like I said, because 95% of the decisions we make every day are subconscious. That's why we don't even think about it. And so you have to plan time to plan this stuff, right? You can't even necessarily just say, I'm going to plan it. Well, okay, yeah, but when? You need to plan time to plan that. You don't understand what I mean? It's a little bit meta. But here is the work that nobody does, right? And so what happens is they wake up a year later, 5 years later, whatever, and all of a sudden they're nowhere. Their life again looks the exact same thing as it did 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. Let me share a statistic for you, Johnny, that is a little bit sobering in the context of relationships, because again, I work with a lot of men, but we talk about marriage mindset, you name it. In the United States today, 70% of all divorces are initiated by women. Okay. In situations where the wife is a high earner, or she has a education, that number jumps to 90%. 9 out of every 10 marriages are ended. 9 out of every 10 divorces are initiated by women. Now, of those statistics, 80% of the time, the wife, the reason why is she feels like she's disconnected emotionally from the husband. So what happens is he's totally unaware. He's totally checked out. He has no idea how unhappy she is. And so this is what happens. They get married and we drift and we drift and we drift. And again, we don't question. We're not intentional in our relationships, in our mindset, in our fitness. And then we wake up 5 years later, 10 years later, and we get served divorce papers and we have no idea how it even happened. It happened because what we're talking about today, a lack of intentionality, because we weren't thinking about where we were going. And we just let the current push us wherever it wanted to take us, right? If I said to you today, Johnny, let's go to the beach, and I just wrote beach in the GPS, I mean, where would we go? We could go East Coast, West Coast, South Coast, North America, South America. I don't know. We may not like where we end up, but I need to give it directions. I need to understand where I want to go, at least to give the GPS a picture of where it should be taking me. Otherwise, man, I could be real unhappy pretty quick. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Being very intentional with your life. I know also, Mitchell, you base quite a lot of your work on like emotional fitness. What is emotional fitness for you?
Oh, what a big question. Um, I think emotional fitness is largely about awareness. It's not about being like a Zen monk, you know. I think especially as men, this is something that we struggle with, and I would say it's important to just start with even just awareness. That's it, right? So when we talk about fitness, yeah, it's first of all, it's recognizing what your emotions are, and then being able to communicate them, and then change them, right? But there's actually a term, I'll speak to the men for a moment. There's a term called normative male alexithymia. Okay, it's a bit of a mouthful, but if you Google it, really what that term means is it's normative, meaning male, or normative, meaning it's normal, male, obviously, man. Alexithymia, if you break down that word, it literally means to arrest or to stop, so, and then in the context of emotions. And so what that phrase says, and what psychologists have, this is why they've coined this, is that men struggle to communicate and to talk about their feelings. And it's very, very normal. It's a part of the male expression. When you press a guy to talk about his feelings, literally often he'll clam up. So he does not have the vocabulary to talk about it. And even if he did have the words, he wouldn't feel comfortable. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so the first thing we want to start with, though, when you ask the question about emotional fitness, is just understanding what's going on the inside, right? So a couple things that might help. and a lot of men don't necessarily realize this, but your emotions will manifest physically first before emotionally. Okay. So you will have physical tells or physical um, signs that you're starting to get dysregulated. So, for example, for me, when I get upset, I start rubbing my hands together like this. Right. And so when my wife sees me doing this, it's like a bit of an amber flag. And she's like, okay, he's getting a little bit, or some guys might rub their forehead like this, or you can feel their chest get tight, or their head gets throppy, or you name it. And so it's important to recognize that because the dysregulation is about to come right after that. So the first step is to understand what are your physical cues or your triggers, right? Not triggers. What are your physical tells? And you may not even know them, but ask your partner, ask your kids, right? What do you see me do physically before I start to get upset, mad, anxious, stressed, whatever? And then let's create a place where it's safe to call that out in the moment. Okay. Be like, hey, remember when we were talking about that while you're doing that thing? Do you need to take some space? And give each other permission to do that. And the second step then is to take space and I mean, we can get into breathing techniques and all that stuff, but essentially is to remove yourself from that environment. Because we know when you get to the point where you're emotionally dysregulated, your prefrontal cortex literally goes offline. Blood flow stops or slows to that part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex is entirely responsible for negotiating, empathy, reasoning, logical thinking, all those things. And so you literally are losing the ability to think logically and to reason and to empathize with your partner when this is going offline. So it doesn't make sense to stay in the room and keep fighting because you end up literally behaving like animals because you both have lost control of your prefrontal cortex. So notice the physical cues, step back, ask some questions, right? What am I feeling right now? Is this anger? Is this insecurity? Is this fear? Is this sorrow? Is this, fill in the blank? And then ask the question, what have I contributed to this? You know, and then, there's a lot more to it than this. I'm trying to give you the Cole's notes. And
Mm.
then within 30 minutes, go back and have the conversation. Because we know, again, the prefrontal cortex takes about 14 to 15 minutes to come back online. So we just double that because we want to be safe. And so for me, my wife is like, hey, can I take 30? You know, and then you take that time to breathe, to reflect, to ask some questions, right? And then come back and have the conversation when that blood flow has started again and you can think
Mm.
logically, right? Because we've all been there. We've lost our temper and then we think back after when we're regulated and we're like, why did I say that? I would never say that. That's crazy. But you did it because you weren't thinking straight. And there's been actually scans. Neurologists have done brain scans on people who are in a state of fight or flight or emotional dysregulation, and they've compared it to people who are having a manic episode, and the brain structure and the blood flow looks very similar. And what that
Wow.
means is your brain is literally functioning like someone who's lost their mind when you're in that kind of state emotionally. So let's not get to that point, right? So when we talk about emotional fitness, to answer your question in a very long way, is to understand the physical cues, to take the space, to ask the questions, and then come back when the time is right. Even if you're just able to do that, it will make massive progress in your relationships and in your career. You name it, right?
Mm. I like that. Yeah, going away when you're in that heated survival mode because that's going to make you respond differently because you've not got that prefrontal cortex online. I love that.
Mm.
You touched on like breathing techniques as well. Is that something you incorporate quite regularly?
Yeah, yeah, because that's the best way to regulate yourself, your nervous system, and to really re-engage the prefrontal cortex and to lower your heart rate because you're in this position of fight or flight, and you're literally your brain is just not operating as it needs to. And so the breathing techniques, there's a couple that I teach and they're very well known. You could Google either one of them as box breathing and then
Hmm.
4-7-8. Now the 4-7-8 is simply just you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7 seconds, and you slowly exhale for 8 seconds, right? Very simple. You do that 3 to 4 times, and then take some time to reflect or whatever the situation is. Now, with a client of mine, it's just we were talking about this, and he just took it and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go do it. And then he'd get into a fight with his wife, and his kids would be there, and he'd just be like standing in the living room being like, you know. And he's like, man, my family got even more anxious. I'm like, well, yeah, because you're breathing like an animal around them and they think you're gonna blow up. You got to take space from them, right? Like, you don't necessarily do it in front of them, because then they're gonna be like, oh, dad's gonna lose it, right? Take space, get out of the room, ask. And if you need to ask for permission respectfully, be like, hey, do you mind if I take this time? And so the 4-7-8 is a beautiful method that I use regularly.
I like that. Yeah, breathwork's done me a world of good, which I do however I'm feeling, because it just kind of helps that nervous system get in check a lot. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
you're not going to feel bad, because that's part of life, all those challenges. But certainly it's helped me over the years regulate a lot quicker back to a more neutral position.
Well, and I think the reason why so many people, they think it's like woo woo, or they think it's BS or whatever. And I would challenge that. If you're listening to this today and you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, here's another guy talking about breath work, um, that might be a little bit of ego talking, right? That might be a little bit of pride talking. Dare I say, a little bit of arrogance of like, you think that maybe perhaps you're above that, or that you don't necessarily want to put in that work. And I would gently ask you, but firmly, how's that working for you? You know what I mean? Because we know the vast majority of men struggle emotionally, and it's not just anger; it's anxiety, it's stress, it's so many different things. And so try it, try it out, and you will be a better man, a better husband, better father, better CEO, better employee, whatever your situation is, you can be better for it. Guys, I say in every single episode of the Dad Nation podcast, when the dad gets better, the whole family wins, right? And a lot of my clients, I'll coach them in this. I'll just say, hey, it's at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to be the lowest heart rate in the room. If that's all you can do, then you're winning, right? Because here's what happens. You come home, you had a hard day, and the kids are screaming, your wife is upset, whatever. She's been having kids hanging off her all day. And you come in and you're like, I don't need this. I had a crazy day. I worked too, rah, 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 rah. And you're adding to the tension, right? But that's not your role as, dare I say, masculine man in the home, right? Your presence needs to be a soothing balm to your family, so that when you come home, your wife or your partner or your kids take a breath and like, okay, dad's home. We can relax. Not the opposite, which is like, oh crap, dad's home. Now we got to walk on eggshells. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, why is this important? Because you're leading your family. You are the blueprint. Your son will grow up, and your children, your daughter going to grow up. They're going to look to you to be that example, right? So if you're yelling at your kids because you lost your mind because you weren't breathing and regulating, the only thing you're teaching your kids, that it's okay to yell and scream to get what you want, even as an adult. That's the only lesson you're teaching them, right? And so that's not a great lesson. And so that's kind of that's why I would say it's so important to just do the breath work, take the space, regulate yourself emotionally, because you will impact every area of your life if you can.
Yeah, it's powerful, powerful tool. And yeah, I like what you said about the being that example of the healthy masculine, and people feeling they can relax in your presence, not heighten their emotions into like that more fight or flight in your presence. And definitely breath work for me has been a huge tool to do that. So I love that you touched on that. One thing I want to ask that you talked about much earlier, Mitchell, was about you found a group of men when you were at your roof, they were at their floor, and they really helped you to like level up.
Mm-hmm.
I can see the benefit in community so much. Like I'm always going to groups, got coaches, things like that. For the individual who's like, I really need to find that. How did you go out about finding your group of guys?
Yeah. So it's so interesting, man. And I didn't have a framework for this. I was just grabbing at straws. But what I
Mm,
did was I just literally, man, I looked at the areas that I needed to grow in my marriage, my
mm,
mental health, my fitness, my finances. And I said, who do I know in my life that has the most money? Who do I know in my life that has the best marriage? Who do I know in my life that's in the best shape? And, went through the whole list, the gamut. And I said, "Hey man, would you be willing to like grab a coffee or grab a beer once a month or maybe once a quarter and just like talk to me about how you did this? How are you such a good husband? What's your secret?
mm,
How did you gain this financial success? How did you get in this shape?" And I tell you what, I don't know why I had the humility to do this because at that back then I was pretty cocky, but I think a lot of men struggle with this because they struggle with the pride. They don't want to necessarily humble themselves to ask for advice or mentorship, right? And if that's you, understand, and you're listening to this today, understand that that's a normal feeling, but that's the feeling that's keeping you trapped. That is the
mm,
exact feeling that's keeping you stuck. Okay. And so I would encourage you with this. I ask my clients this all the time because I actually built a framework around this, which I'll walk you through. It's called the Iron Five. It's so impacted my life that every one of my clients has an Iron Five, five guys that surround them. Um, but I'll say to guys all the time, like, has anyone ever reached out to you for success or for advice or for wisdom or wanted your perspective on something? I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. So, well, how did that feel? And they're like, well, it felt pretty good. I was actually kind of flattered. So I said, well, okay. So were you happy to meet with them? I said, yeah. In fact, would you have potentially considered moving things around in your schedule so that you could meet with them? A lot of them are like, yeah, because I want to help. So I say, okay, well, what makes you think that you would be any different than anyone else that's sought your advice? Because here's the thing, anyone ahead of you is never going to criticize you for wanting to get to the next level because anyone that's ahead of you knows how hard it is to get to where you're going. They understand how
mm,
hard it is to get into great shape and have a great marriage or build a great business. They're never going to criticize you. You know who is? The people who are behind you. But guess what? They don't matter because they're not going to be where you're going anyways. So who cares? Right?
mm,
Have the humility to reach out to these guys because they get you and they're going to support you. They're going to rally around you. And every single time, I've never ever gotten a no. I would, dude, in that season I was in when I was overweight, all that stuff. When I was fired from that leadership position, I started doing home renos, general contracting, hauling brick. Like it was brutal. The house that I was working on, he had like six properties, and he seemed to be such a kind, loving man. I said, "Hey, you don't know me, but I'm in a tough spot, financially. I'm really kind of trying to better myself. I want to get out of debt. I want to build financial peace and security in my family. Would you be willing to meet and just share with me some financial principles?" The dude was like, "I'd love to. I'd love to.
mm,
When do you want to meet?" And this guy had multiple businesses, multiple properties. And that was just some punk hauling brick, out of his house. And that was the one of the things that started that trajectory for me, right? So that's the value of it for me, and that's why I started the whole Dad Nation movement, is because there's power in community. But we like to be the lone wolf, right?
mm.
And we think that it's like manly or masculine. Well, I tell you what, man, the lone wolf dies alone, right? The strong wolf builds packs. It's what they do.
Oh, like that.
And so have the courage to reach out and form your own Iron Five, your own tribe of men who uh, who can hold you to that standard and encourage you when you need it. Um, Join a community. It doesn't have to be mine. It could be anyone's, whatever that looks like, right?
Mm. Yeah, it's something I've learned. Such a simple way that actually there are people with the results who, asking them seems like the common sense, thing to do, but actually we hold ourselves back from asking and these things. And I don't know if you've experienced this as well, Mitchell, but there's also, not necessarily bad people, well-meaning people wanting to give a lot of advice, but perhaps aren't the best people to get it from when it's more of an opinion. Like, I've had friends in my early 20s talking about like, he could never hold down a relationship, but he was like, this is how they get the girl or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm not listening to you. Or it'd be like someone talking about how to make money in business and they've not started yet, or the person like talking about health and they're not in the healthiest position. But Yeah, I always like to look at the people's results as well, and actually
Mhm.
see what kind of life they're living. But yeah, I love how that really wealthy guy. And he sounded not just wealthy in money, but wealthy in his happiness and his life
Mhm.
as well. It seemed was able to help you out. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Don't listen to people's talk. Look at the
Mm,
way they walk, right?
mm,
Look at the fruit in their life. Okay? Are they still they might be successful, but are they still married?
mm,
Right? If they've if they're if their personal life is a total disaster, but they've launched a couple great businesses, okay, cool. But do you want to learn from that person, or do you want to learn from someone who's been successful in business and also the other things?
mm.
You know, because that's that holistic balance we're looking for. Those are the people we need to be drawn to. Or another, another thing that I'll often mention is just if someone's constantly telling you why you should listen to them, you probably shouldn't listen to them. You understand what I mean? Because the people who actually have great information to share and real wisdom don't feel the pressure to tell you about the wisdom that they have, right?
Mm.
And the problem is the people who are saying, listen to me, they often get the attention. But the people with the real wealth of information, the real wisdom, are never going to be screaming at you. And so it takes you to kind of seek them out in a lot of situations, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't always have to be the influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers either. It's often I found like one of the real new friend I made at a network event, and I yeah put the money in to get the diamond ticket at the event because I was like yeah gonna do it, and then I made a really good friend, and she hardly uses socials and things like that, and she's like a multi-millionaire in business, and the stuff I have conversations with her about, it's like wow. So it's not always in the noise. It's sometimes there's sometimes somewhere else, and you have to seek them out. Definitely found that as well.
I would say every single one of my mentors outside of business, for me personally, has had almost no social media following.
Mm,
They weren't concerned with that. The only time I started to dig into, the influencers and all that stuff is when I wanted to grow my business and I needed I needed someone who was walking that walk with, whatever. So I kind of elevated in that sense and
mm,
started to pay for coaching and pay for mentorship and pay for advice. But I guarantee you, there's people in your life, if you're listening today, there's people in your life that have 10 times the knowledge you do in a lot of different areas. And that you don't even necessarily know it. You're sitting on a gold mine of a network and relationships that you're not even necessarily aware of, right? But I would encourage you to have the humility to do an audit, right? Ask yourself where you're at in all these different areas. Begin with the end in mind, and then say, okay, I want to go here, here, and here, and these are the things I want to do. Okay, here are the people in my life today that I could reach out to, and they could at least give me the first three steps, right? And that's all we need to do is start.
mm. And linking to that, the RM5 you mentioned, is that like yeah? Tell us a little bit more about that. I think you've covered quite aspects of it, but just to kind of summarize what the RM5 is.
Yeah, for sure. It's just five different roles, so to speak, and it
Mm,
doesn't have to be this specific. This is what I use with my clients, so because we're really tailored and specific and custom. But the number one, the first guy is called the partner. Okay, this is the person that walks with you. He's your battle, your brother in battle, right? He's the guy who knows your wins, who knows your wounds. You don't have to wear a mask with him. He knows everything. The partner. The second one is the protector. Okay, this is the guy who watches your blind spots. He's the guy who sees what you miss. He's the guy who calls out your patterns, the stuff that will take you out if left unchecked, right? He speaks to you with truth, but also with grit because he cares about you. He's the protector. Number three is the provider. This is the person that invests in your growth. This is the mentor. This is the coach. This is the, whatever that person who is going to provide you with, and invest in you and your knowledge and your wisdom and all that stuff. This is someone who's been where you want to go and is willing to open the doors, share wisdom, and shorten your learning curve. Like I said, collapse in that time. The fourth one is called the pusher, right? This is the guy who's the most uncomfortable relationship you have because he demands your best. This is the brother who won't let you coast. He continuously pulls you out of your comfort zone, and he reminds you of who you said you wanted to be, right? And then the fifth one is the pioneer. And this guy is the guy who shows you what's possible. He's way ahead of you, and he's living the life that you're aiming for. His example is what expands your vision of what you think is possible, right? His wins remind you that your current ceiling, right, is someone else's starting floor. And so that's the five, man. The partner, the provider, the protector, the pusher, and the pioneer. And I tell you, man, if you got those five people, I mean, if you wanted to go that specific, you could. But even if you just got five guys around you in the different areas you want to grow in, within 90 days, man, you'd be a different person. Whether it is you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter. This applies to both genders. I don't care who it is. You want help in your parent in your motherhood, in your career as a growing female entrepreneur, as whatever that looks like, right? It's applicable to both genders.
And the five people, just to sound maybe a silly question, but are they five people you know? Because the fifth one, the real vision, could that be someone you like, some kind of idol you look up to, or these ideally five people you know?
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I would say that two-way relationship or two-way feedback is always better, right? So if you can speak a sentence to someone and they can speak a sentence back to you and give you feedback, then that's always really valuable. But in the context of, say, the pioneer, which is the person who is way ahead of you, who shows you what he's living the life you're aiming for, that might be someone that like a coach you pay for, or invest in, right? So the pioneer and the I would say that the provider, which is another variation of it, he could be a coach or she could be a mentor of yours. But the other people, like the pusher, you don't. I mean, that could just be someone who's got a lot of grit, who cares about you, and is willing to pull you out of the comfort zone. The partner is someone who's your buddy. He's your 3 a.m. friend who you're going to call at any time. You know what I mean? All that stuff, right? So it doesn't have to be always people who you immediately know in your circle. There can be, digital relationships, I guess, in your Iron Five, if they need to be, and that's fine, until you can expand your network, right? But I would say two-way is always the best.
I think we're coming back to the overarching message of don't be the lone wolf today, basically, which is again for me, it's something I've had to overcome over the years. I'm going to be honest, used to be the kind of guy like trying to take on everything myself. So yeah, I really value that message, all the things you've been holding in today, Mitchell,
Yeah.
and yeah, and that kind of like leads me to like where can the listener find you if they want to find out more about your work? I believe you've got something really great, some questions you're going to share with us today as well. And is there a final point that you'd like to leave us with today?
Mm, yeah, that's so good. Thank you for asking, and I'd love to share a free gift with your listeners if that's okay with you. But what you're referencing is called the connection code, right? So let's flash back to what I was saying earlier about the divorce rates that the staggering in the U.S. that are initiated by women, and the vast majority of them are the reasons for initiating the divorce are because of a lack of emotional connection. And I see this in almost every single one of my clients. And so I've developed something called the connection code, okay, which is just 50 questions that have strategically been designed to spark the fun and get the fire back. And legitimately, Johnny, these questions, like, they cover everything from your dreams, everyday stuff, to passion, intimacy, you name it. And so, whether it's you go out on a date night, or you put the kids down, you pour up a glass of wine. The only rule is the only questions you can ask your partner have to be from this list. And I'm telling you, if you're listening to this, I'm handing it to you on a silver platter. Okay, it just makes it so easy. And I get women contacting me all the time who are like, "Man, my husband used this thing last night. Who is this man that took me on a date? I never felt so connected to him." So real powerful, and free for you today if you wanna check it out. Just go to dadnationcode.com/code, and you can pick it up there. I'll give you the link that you can put in the
Sure.
show notes, Johnny, if you don't mind. Where you can find me? Great question, man. Just honestly, if you just Google Dad Nation, you'll see my face plastered on a few different places, right? Dad Nation or Mitchell Osmond. I got a YouTube channel and of course the podcast, but I try and keep it super simple because, you know, there's a lot of noise in our world today, but I do three things. Okay. It's content, courses, and coaching. So the content is the podcast, the Dad Nation podcast. The course is something called the High Performance Husband. And this is what I teach all my one-to-one clients, but it's in a digital self-guided trilogy. It's a digital program you can download. And then obviously the coaching is one-to-one or cohort style, the community that we do that as well. And then the last thing, to leave your listeners with, maybe a thought or an encouragement would be this. Whether you are a man and you're listening or you know a man, that should be about 100% of you who are listening to the show. But understand today that in the U.S. today, 1 in 4 children will be raised in a home without a father. Now, although some parts of society would say men don't matter, I'll share some statistics with you that might change that. They're quite sobering. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. 93% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And this one, which is a kicker for me, 71% of all high school dropouts in the U.S. today come from fatherless homes. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the world needs you, that you matter to your family, that you matter to your community, that you matter in your marriage. And so if you're feeling discouraged, if you're feeling like you don't have a purpose, trust and believe today that you matter to your family, to this world. And I hope this conversation has been encouraging to you, whatever walk of life you're coming from. But just be encouraged today that when you get better, everyone wins.
Absolutely. And if you're a man or you know a man like we talked about, and there's that feeling of like I want a bit more, where do I start? Definitely check out Mitchell's website and Mitchell's resources, which will be linked in the show notes below. So a massive thank you, Mitchell, for just a handful of the value in the world you're giving today.
Thank you, Johnny. It's been a pleasure and an honor. I'll say this just real quick before we go. Time is the currency, the only currency that we spend without knowing the remaining balance. Okay, I don't know how much time I have left, whether it's 60 minutes or 60 years. But in any case, I'm so thankful to you, Johnny, and your listeners for giving me, 45, 50 minutes, whatever of your time. It's so valuable. And thanks, man. I honor you, and thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. No, I appreciate you. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.